Now that we have energy poverty legislation at the EU level, a lot of it now is dependent on the member states themselves. The key thing for member states is, first of all, to devote sufficient financial resources to energy poverty alleviation, but also to not narrow down the definition of energy poverty solely to particular income groups, which some member states are doing. They are just making it a subset of income poverty, which I think is a challenge and an issue, because we know that energy poverty itself is a wider problem than income poverty. And people who are sometimes on incomes that are above the threshold for income poverty are also energy poor because they live in energy inefficient dwellings or for other reasons. And so it's very much now down to the member states. And raising awareness and lobbying and being active and advocating for energy poverty at the member state level, so that there is a broad enough and an inclusive enough approach, is really crucial at this stage. When you implement an energy efficiency policy or a building renovation policy, you have to make sure that it's not only those who are able to pay for the policy, those who are well off, in the middle class, as we say, or above the middle class, that benefit from this policy. The key thing is that it has to be targeted, it has to be available, and it has to be accessible to people on lower incomes. People who normally wouldn't invest for a whole range of reasons, or would find it challenging to improve the energy efficiency of the home. But it's not just the distribution, it's also the process through which these policies are implemented. And it's often the case that in the process of implementation, again, it's people who are better off, who are more engaged in the process, and again, the policies go to them, and they're designed and tailored. They recognize the needs of people who are better off. So a lot of it is about participation, about engagement at the very beginning of the process, not just when the policy is designed and then is implemented, but from the very beginning. And finally, and this is something that is increasingly now being recognized in a lot of policies, is the spatial element. And in fact, thinking about whether neighborhoods, whether a lot of the places that are struggling, that are usually not necessarily the beneficiaries of support, are actually involved in policies, that there are comprehensive approaches to neighborhood level renovation through presence in neighborhoods, presence in cities. Also that institutions active at this level, that what we call intermediaries often at the neighborhood level, are adequately supported and engaged, also matters. So we have that spatial element also as a crucial element of the energy justice dimensions of renovation. There certainly is a lot more recognition and acceptance, a lot more action on energy poverty, more and more on a daily basis. So certainly the issue is getting more recognition and more attention. That doesn't, however, mean that that the issue is resolved, because as something that's structural, long-term, historical, that is in essence really a feature of the energy system, a feature of how the energy system is organized, a feature of the housing system, a feature of the social security system, and a feature of the regional governance system. So it's very, very deep systemic changes that are needed, especially when we know that there is enough energy to go around. There is a possibility to renovate all of our housing to be so that it uses a lot less energy. Certainly within Europe, the process has moved, but there's so much more to be done. And some European countries, some member states of the EU are much more advanced in this process than others. But obviously that changes from a day-to-day basis. It's also kind of beholden to national politics. So you might get changes after a particular election, which will roll back a lot of the progress that's been done. So sometimes it's a bit like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But overall, we are moving. I'm still optimistic, and I think overall we've been moving in the right direction, but there is so much more work left to be done. With the Social Climate Fund and the Social Climate Plans, we've seen the entrance of social objectives inside the EU's remit, which I think is a very interesting development. Nevertheless, the social distribution and social participation element is largely a national member state issue within the EU. So it's about what happens at the national level and how those institutions can work with everything that's happening in the energy efficiency and building renovation sector. So a lot of it, in my view, having worked also at the national and the member state level, comes down to how those social institutions work with energy and housing. And in some member states, that third element, housing, is also very poorly developed as a sector. So it's not something that even is seen as a core national competence. Sometimes that's devolved to the local level. So there is I wouldn't say that there is a blueprint for this. There are many positive cases, particularly I would say the case of Barcelona within the Catalan government, but also Spain more generally. That was always for me one of the really good instances of working together collaboratively at the local level, but also within legislation that was at a higher level of governance. There are other cases. I've seen also some good examples in France. I've seen good examples now increasingly actually in Poland as well. So there are instances where you can see that all of those governance structures are working together, but it's very challenging, and again, changes all the time. But it is important to find ways and to be actually aware, not just to find ways of working together, but to be aware of the competencies that are distributed within each member state, and the fact that sometimes housing doesn't even fall within the national remit in a kind of organized way, that it's often devolved. And so all of us who are working in this sector have to know how to connect these different scales of governance.